The art of diplomacy is to make the world safer difference. That's John F. Kennedy. Feels quite relevant for what we're discussing today, doesn't it?
It really does, navigating these complex relationships.
Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive.
Good to be here.
Today, we're taking a close look at India's latest invitation to the G7 summit, the one in Canada, 2025.
Right, and we're basing our discussion on, a pretty insightful analysis published in the Indian Express. It really digs into the significance.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, is to unpack what this invitation really means, especially, given the recent strains between India and Canada.
Mm-hmm. What does that signal for them? And maybe more broadly for the global picture.
We think this is crucial stuff if you're following international relations, global economics.
Or even, preparing for exams like UPSC, where these dynamics are core syllabus areas.
Or frankly, just if you want to stay well-informed as a citizen about how the world works. This analysis from a major paper gives us a specific lens.
Definitely. So where do we start? The invitation itself.
Yeah, let's start with the facts laid out in the analysis, what happened.
Okay, so the concrete news is Prime Minister Modi confirmed he'll attend the 51st G7 summit. It's June 15th to 17th, 2025 in Kananaskis, Canada.
Announced on X, wasn't it?
That's right. Pretty straightforward announcement.
But the analysis quickly points out this isn't exactly a one-off.
No, not at all. This is actually India's 6th consecutive invitation to the G7. That's the big group. US, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Japan.
6th time in a row. PM Modi has attended every year since 2019, starting with the summit in France.
And the Indian Express analysis really emphasizes this point. It argues this consistency, it underlines India's rising global stature.
Its economic weight.
Its growing economic influence, exactly, and its role as a key geopolitical actor now. It signals a shift in how the G7 views India fundamentally.
Okay, so that consistency is important context, but the analysis argues this particular invitation, the 2025 one from Canada, has this extra layer of meaning.
A significant added layer, yes. And it stems entirely from the really difficult recent history between India and Canada.
The analysis doesn't mince words. It says ties reached a nadir, a real low point under the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau.
A nadir, strong language.
And the cause, as the analysis details it. Trudeau's public accusation about India's alleged role in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
Right. The Sikh extremist figure.
Yeah.
And that accusation, according to this analysis, sparked the worst diplomatic fallout ever between India and Canada. Just unprecedented.
So it's against that backdrop, this really severe strain, that this invitation from Canada suddenly lands with, a different kind of weight.
Exactly. The analysis frames it as marking a potential shift in the bilateral dynamic, a conscious move.
And the person making that move, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, he conveyed the invite in a direct call.
Yeah, and the analysis notes his background. He's an economist. That might hint at his priorities, perhaps.
Perhaps. The Indian Express piece suggests this invite is positioned as a key part of trying to, rebuild that damaged relationship, especially with PM Modi expected to visit Canada for the summit.
It's being called a promising start to the reset under Carney. That's the framing in the analysis.
And it wasn't totally out of the blue, right? The analysis mentioned steps leading up to it.
No, there was groundwork. PM Modi sent a congratulatory tweet after Carney's election. Then there were calls between the foreign ministers.
So the G7 invite is presented as a kind of natural step forward, a concrete action following that initial, maybe cautious outreach, mending ties.
Okay, so let's get into Carney's perspective, as interpreted by the analysis. Why extend this olive branch now, given everything? The investigation is still ongoing, isn't it?
It is, and that's the tightrope. The analysis highlights Carney's focus on trade potential, huge potential between India and Canada.
Right, and it specifically mentions Canada looking to diversify its partnerships, trying to reduce what the analysis calls an over-reliance on the United States.
So India, with its massive, fast-growing economy, becomes a really attractive partner for that diversification strategy. Makes sense.
But it puts Carney in a tricky spot, as the analysis points out, a diplomatic tightrope. He's got the strategic logic pushing him towards India, but also domestic political pressures.
Especially since, as the article notes, he comes from a similar party structure as Trudeau. He has to navigate that legacy, presumably.
So how does the analysis say he's justifying the invite, publicly and perhaps privately, despite the ongoing Nijjar investigation involving Indian officials?
The analysis breaks down his stated reasons quite clearly. First, India's sheer economic significance.
The numbers.
Yeah, fifth largest economy, effectively the most populous country. You can't ignore that scale.
And beyond size.
Strategic importance, particularly India's central role in global supply chains. That's a huge focus for G7 countries right now. Economic security, reliable supply chains.
So India's participation isn't just, like, nice to have.
He framed it as essential, according to the analysis. Essential for G7 talks on big global priorities. Energy security, critical minerals, infrastructure partnerships, things the G7 wants to coordinate.
Okay, that makes sense strategically. Anything else?
Yes, and this is crucial. The analysis notes Carney also acknowledged a strong push from the other G7 countries for India to be there.
Ah, so not just a purely bilateral Canadian decision.
Exactly. It suggests a broader G7 consensus that India's voice is needed at the table for these global economic and strategic discussions.
So how's he handling the domestic angle, the critics who point to the unresolved investigation?
The analysis describes his approach as quite careful. He's apparently assuring critics the investigation is proceeding independently, no interference.
Okay.
He's framing India's G7 participation as a separate issue, a diplomatic necessity, a geopolitical imperative. The argument being you can engage on global issues without undermining the legal process at home, trying to keep them separate.
Compartmentalizing, a classic diplomatic move, though easier said than done sometimes.
Definitely. Which brings us to the reactions in Canada, as laid out in the analysis. Not everyone was happy, were they?
No, definitely a mixed bag. The analysis does note bipartisan support for stronger relations in general, especially from the Conservative Party.
Right, the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, apparently endorsed the invitation.
And the analysis highlights his focus: economic opportunities, promoting Canadian exports like natural gas, civilian nuclear tech, resources to India, also cooperation on trade and security. It's very much an economic and strategic alignment.
And the analysis also mentioned former Conservative PM Stephen Harper.
Yes, he apparently urged Canada to renew ties, calling India indispensable. And he made a pretty pointed comment suggesting Canadian parties should cut ties with Sikh separatist activists to help mend the relationship.
So a clear push from the Conservative side towards prioritizing the state-to-state relationship.
But then you have the criticism. The analysis points to the New Democratic Party. They used to back Trudeau on some things. They reportedly called the invocation inappropriate because of the unresolved investigation.
So clear political divisions there.
And that highlights the domestic tightrope Carney's walking. The analysis also mentions other pressures too, right? Beyond party politics.
Yes. Specifically online campaigns. Groups like Sikhs for Justice and the World Sikh Organization are mentioned.
What are they doing?
Demanding the invite be rescinded. And, according to the analysis, planning protests at the G7 venue itself when PM Modi is there.
Okay, so that's a direct challenge. The analysis frames this whole situation, the politics, the protests, as the real test of Carney's leadership.
Can he manage the potential disruption, keep things calm, while still moving forward with this reset agenda symbolized by the invitation?
And the analysis suggests his strategy is this idea of de-hyphenating domestic politics from foreign policy.
Trying to carve out space so that Canada's international interests aren't completely derailed by domestic sensitivities or legal processes. A tough balancing act.
And the analysis really stresses placing this whole Canadian decision within the bigger global picture.
Right. The context matters hugely. The West, the G7 countries, they're dealing with massive challenges.
Like what?
China's rise, the Russia-Ukraine war and its global impact, even uncertainty about future U.S. policy, maybe a Trump return.
And in that volatile context, the analysis suggests India is seen as a kind of stabilizing factor by many in the G7.
More than just stable, though. It's also about balancing power. India is seen as a crucial counterbalance to China in the Indo-Pacific.
A key strategic priority for the G7.
Absolutely. And there's another role India plays, according to the analysis, acting as a bridge.
A bridge between who?
Between the West and the global South. India has relationships across the board. It can talk to different groups. That makes its presence in forums like the G7 potentially very valuable for finding common ground.
So, putting it all together, the analysis concludes that Carney's invitation, despite the risks, signals two big things.
One, it's a bold move by Canada trying to turn a page.
And two, it's clear acknowledgement of India's, undeniable global weight. Its credentials keep growing.
As the world's fastest-growing major economy, the analysis says its participation is now seen as critical to the effective functioning of multilateral forums, like the G7, They need India there to tackle the big issues.
Okay, so that really synthesizes the core arguments from the Indian Express analysis. We've covered India's consistent G7 presence, the recent deep freeze with Canada over the Niger issue.
The new Canadian PM Carney's role in extending the invite as a reset, the mix of economic and strategic reasons behind it.
The divided reactions inside Canada, both support and criticism, and importantly, the wider geopolitical context that makes India so significant right now.
And understanding all these threads, well, it really shows you the complexity, doesn't it? How domestic politics slams into foreign policy, how countries navigate history versus strategy.
And just how the global order is shifting. For anyone tracking these things, whether for UPSC exams or just for informed understanding, these nuances are everything. It's not just headlines.
So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on based on this analysis. Given those domestic challenges Carney faces in Canada, the investigation, the protests,
And balancing that against the clear strategic need to engage India. How durable is this reset? Could the domestic heat force a U-turn, or is the geopolitical pull towards India just too strong now?
or maybe think about it this way. How does India's own balancing act, engaging with the West, Russia, the global South, while growing so fast economically, make its role in places like the G7 not just helpful, but maybe essential for those forums to even work effectively on global problems anymore?
Interesting questions to ponder. We hope this deep dive into the analysis gave you some food for thought.
If you found this useful, if it helped you understand the situation better, please do give us a like. It helps others find the discussion.
And definitely subscribe to The Deep Dive. We'll keep bringing you these kinds of explorations into important topics, grounded in specific sources.
We'd also genuinely appreciate hearing your perspective. What are your thoughts on this India-Canada dynamic or India's role in the G7? Any questions the analysis raises for you, drop them in the comments.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us for The Deep Dive.